It was in 1943, when I was working at the Indian Institute of Science at Bangalore, that I was impressed by the circumstance that Indian science was being hampered by the lack of adequate financial support. I therefore put forward my proposal, and it was accepted by the Tata Trust, and the institute was founded on the 1st June 1945, jointly by the Tata Trust and the Government of Bombay.
How did he think of that in 1951, when India was a very poor country, had nothing to offer in terms of money or facilities for most scientists?
His vision in science was very much also affected by the times. I mean, he started out in the early 1940s and recognized the need for building a large indigenous enterprise of our own in India. You know, having, as he called it, a school of physics comparable to the best anywhere would ultimately nucleate and go far beyond just the sort of narrow confines of theoretical physics or cosmic ray physics and nucleate something that is much larger.
He brought a kind of cosmopolitanism to Indian institutions and the ambience of Indian institutions, which until that point in time were largely parochial and provincial in their spirit. TIFR is probably among the first major institutions which in spirit was completely national and pan-Indian. People's origin, their languages, their caste, their communities were not important. The only important thing was their professional qualifications.
He had worked in Cambridge and came back. Some of the ideas he brought back were this collegial structure, where you have a number of leaders of science leading work in many areas, and they're working together as equals. And the director is one among equals. You know, it gave these leaders of science who were leading fairly large teams and grooming the younger people for the next generation. They could think of themselves as people having autonomy.
This Wednesday colloquia became a regular feature, and it goes on even today. And as long as Dr. Bhabha lived, he made it a point to come for the Wednesday colloquium. Whatever may be the other activities, he would set them apart. And one thing that about Dr. Bhabha was he had a lot of contact with scientists abroad. And during his period, they used to come, spend 1 week, 2 weeks, sometimes even a month, visiting TIFR.
Bhabha initiated a vigorous program of outstanding visitors to TIFR and also organized many schools and conferences where some of the world's best scientists and mathematicians came and interacted with the scientists of TIFR and the students. People of this eminence actually have visited the Tata Institute, spent time here, given courses, and I think that has contributed a lot to the visibility of the Tata Institute in the early years. Bhabha emphasized excellence. He said, a scientific institution has to be grown like a tree. Its growth in terms of quality and achievement can only be accelerated to a limited extent. This is a field in which a large number of mediocre or second-rate workers cannot make up for a few outstanding ones. And the few outstanding ones always take 10 to 15 years to grow.
he was very proud of the institute. The institute has a special place in his life. So while all the other things that he was doing, larger scale things, he did it as I would say, was the work that he was doing for the country. But the institute was something which he enjoyed.
It was a very happy family background of his mother, his father, and the younger brother. There was a huge collection of gramophone records, which he and Jamshed and a friend of theirs used to play, absolutely quiet, just listening to the music. He was very good as a student, and he of course did extremely well in science, and he did well in the Cathedral and John Connon School, of which he was a student.
When Homi finished school, he was put by father into the Institute of Science. Then it was called Royal Institute of Science. And there, he soon found that he was being taught what he had learned 2 years earlier at school.
When he went to Cambridge, he went primarily to do an engineering typos. And that was at his father's instance. His father thought that it would be a very good thing for Homi to get a training in engineering, which would then fit him for any job in industry, particularly in the Tatas at a later stage. Though he did well in engineering, but however, he wanted to do mathematics and natural science. Homi Bhabha wrote a letter to his father in which he pleaded to be able to do mathematics typos. That is a degree in mathematics in Cambridge. He went on to do a number of things in Cambridge. People very seldom realize that he was a good sportsman.
Of course, ultimately we know him as a theoretical physicist of great repute and who made key contributions. But in fact, it is this engineering training which I think has been a key to Dr. Bhabha's ability to see things differently from most scientists.
Homi, as a student there, was deeply fascinated by the type of individuals he encountered. And one of the persons whom he always regarded as a role model was Paul Dirac.
That was a very, very exciting period for science in Cambridge because Dirac had discovered in 1928 his famous equation, the Dirac equation. The Dirac equation had one very striking and fundamental prediction, and that is the prediction of an antiparticle corresponding to the electron. Bhabha set out actually to do a calculation based on the Dirac theory and quantum electrodynamics. And this is the scattering amplitude which you would have generally written down. But there is another piece, is what is called the annihilation diagram, which is also called the exchange diagram, which vindicated the verity of the Dirac theory and of quantum electrodynamics. But in the end, The Dirac theory and Bhabha's calculation were vindicated by experiment. And even today, Bhabha scattering is used in collider experiments. And what can be a greater tribute to Bhabha that this calculation of Bhabha, which is called Bhabha scattering, is textbook material in quantum field theory. Cosmic rays are very highly energetic charged particles that bombard the outer atmosphere of the Earth. And they interact with the molecules of the atmosphere and lead to a cascade of particles that is then observed near the surface of the Earth. So Bhabha and Heitler made a very important contribution by explaining the physics of this cosmic ray shower in terms of a certain thing called the cascade theory. Bhabha made a very ingenious hypothesis that there must be a new elementary particle exactly like the electron, but about 100 times heavier than the electron. This negatively charged heavy electron was subsequently discovered by Anderson and Niedermeyer in cosmic rays in 1939 and found to be approximately 200 times the mass of the electron. And this particle today is called the muon. In 1939, Bhabha returned to India for a holiday and was not able to go back. Destiny led him in a different direction, where he would discover his calling as a builder of great institutions in India. So Bhabha was appointed as a reader in charge of the cosmic ray unit in the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore, where Professor C.V. Raman was the head of the physics department. So Bhabha began research in cosmic ray physics, balloon flights, experimental science in the Indian Institute of Science at Bangalore.
There was a visit of a very famous cosmic ray physicist called Millikan to India to fly balloons. Thereafter, Bhabha decided to do the balloon flying himself. And so there were arrays of rubber balloons which were sent up from Bangalore from the Indian Institute of Science with cosmic ray payloads. And there were a number of rubber balloon flights which were conducted from different locations in India, where some of the earliest results in cosmic rays, which were of profound importance in particle physics, where those discoveries were made. When Homi came to the Indian Institute of Science, Homi was first doing mathematical physics, highly theoretical physics, and he did a lot of that as part of his continuation of the work he had done earlier. He started TIFR based on two concepts. One was the need of India for very large amounts of energy to increase the per capita consumption and availability. And he knew that this would come through the nuclear route. The other concept which motivated him was the power of fundamental research. He decided to create an institution, and he did this essentially by writing a letter to Mr. J.R.D. Tata.
He wrote to J.R.D. Tata, now the dark clouds are over the horizon. I was thinking of going back to England. Now I consider it's my duty to stay here.
Mr. Tata wrote, and I quote, "From what you say in your letter, it is evident that there is scope for rendering valuable service to the country and to the cause of scientific research in India. After all, the advance of science is one of the fundamental objects for which most of the Tata Trusts were founded."
And his suggestion that Homi approach the Sir Dorabji Tata Trust, which he did with a letter written to the chairman of the trust at that time, Sir Saurabh Shaklatwala. And he had then suggested that he would be able to build up an institution of excellence in the country for fundamental research.
I thought I will join here in the physics department and work with Bhabha, but then he had moved to Bombay. When I joined TIFR in 1948 August, TIFR was still at Pedder Road, Bombay, which was actually Bhabha's aunt's place, and half of that building had been given for the TIFR. In 1949, September, we moved to the Yacht Club building in Apollo Pier.
Whereas in physics, already Bhabha had started recruiting students. After Professor Chandrasekharan joined here is when he started taking students in mathematics.
Bhabha was a great institution builder. He built his institution, namely the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, around outstanding people. He would invite outstanding people in various areas of science and mathematics to come and take charge, and then give them a free hand to grow their groups and departments.
It was thus that the mathematics group was built around three individuals. One was K. Chandrasekharan, the other was K.G. Ramanathan, and the third was D.D. Kosambi.
Bhabha seems to have been fond of mathematics. The line between physics and mathematics, especially in the early part of the 20th century, was very thin. There's almost seamless joint between the two subjects. In fact, there's even a book which is partially written, it didn't complete the book, which is purely mathematical, theory of spin-offs it's called.
For many years, the great progress made in mathematical research in India at the highest world level happened in Tata Institute. And in that sense, it was the Bhabha's initiative which started this.
Long years ago, we made a tryst with destiny, and now the time comes when we shall redeem our pledge. At the stroke of the midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India will awake to life and freedom. It is fitting that at this solemn moment we take the pledge of dedication to the service of India and her people and to the still larger cause of humanity.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is my brief but very pleasant duty to welcome you all. I am particularly happy to thank the Prime Minister on this occasion to come here, speak to us, and lay the foundation stone for the new buildings of the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research.
बहनों और भाइयों, अगर हम अपने मुल्क को, खासकर आजकल जो हम आज़ाद हो गए हैं, मजबूत उसे करना है, तो ये बुनियाद हमें देनी है उसको कि जिन जिन फनों में, विज्ञान में और बातों में जिससे और देश आगे हमारे बढ़ गए हैं, उनको हम यहाँ सीखें। और सीखें कैसे? ज़्यादा दूर तक जाके बुनियादी तौर से कि बड़े सिखाने वालों में दुनिया के हमारे यहाँ भी पैदा हों। तब अगर हम उस दरख्त को यहाँ उसके बीज लगाएं तो उस दरख्त के फल फूल बहुत निकलें, जिससे हमारे मुल्क की ताकत बढ़े और मुल्क की जनता को फ़ायदा हो।
The foundation stone is being laid today, 8.5 years after the institute was founded, because the real thing that matters is the work that is done. I remember when the institute was opened, the chairman of the council in his speech said, "We have not in the usual way waited for the completion of new buildings before commencing our research activities, but have, so to speak, plunged in medias res." I regard this as a happy augury for the future, because in creative work of this kind, what matters most is the enthusiasm of those concerned with it.
One day he called me and said, Srikantan, you should go to Kolar goldfields and then do experiments underground and see whether the particles underground are the same mu mesons which we see on the surface, or whether there are different particles. I went to Kolar goldfields for the first time. What we started in 1951 lasted till 1992. A lot of collaborative experiments were done with Japanese, British scientists and all that. Nearly 30 to 40 PhD theses have come out of the work done in Kolar goldfields. All because Dr. Bhabha initiated this program of doing underground experiments at a very early stage.
It shows the absolute necessity of finding some new source of energy if the light of our civilization is not to be extinguished. I venture to predict that a method will be found for liberating fusion energy in a controlled manner within the next 2 decades. When that happens, the energy problems of the world will truly have been solved forever.
The DA is a very broad spectrum institute. As I told you, that you have to start from the prospecting for the mineral, to extract the mineral and process, that is mining, and processing that into the material which you'll be using. You'll come to the fuel fabrication, then that fuel goes into the reactor building. So as you know that the first reactor in Asia was also built by Indians without any external support, and that is Apsara.
I was the first to join in the reactors group. So I was the head of the reactors group, which included reactor design, construction, commissioning and operation. My first assignment was the construction of Apsara reactor. I was doing the engineering part, and a colleague of mine, Dr. Esrao, was looking after the control section. We did it in a very short time, to expectation. Although at that time, as I recall, he had a bet with John Cockcroft, who is the head of the UK Atomic Energy Authority, that we would be able to finish it so soon. And we won the bet.
We have inherited a very useful and innovative mind because of the traditions that were set up in this country. And Baba really understood this problem, and therefore he never went abroad to get more and more factories and more equipment. He decided that everything should be done as far as possible in India.
Even from Bhaba's early work, you see that he realized that we have to be self-sufficient in our resources. So he opened the mine in Jadugoda, way back at that time. He started geological work right at that time to see that we develop from our own resources to a completely mature, complete technology with which we can provide energy to the country, and with the help of atomic energy, various other non-power applications in healthcare, in agriculture, and of course also on national security.
At that time, he thought of setting up the nuclear energy program of the country, starting with TIFR, of course, and later on, Bhabha Atomic Research Center was set in this place now known as Atomic Energy Establishment, Trombay. He set up the BRC training school, starting with a research reactor, because that would serve as the mainstay for training the manpower, not only in the sciences for the research, but also for setting up the nuclear power plants of the future.
And there were those who were not sure that this was the right thing to do. I think Saha was a critic of Bhabha. He thought there were other ways of doing the program. Kosambi said nuclear energy is wasteful, we should really do solar energy. Well, those were points of view which had to be considered. But in spite of that, I think the legacy of Bhabha was firmly founded by the time he died.
The computer group was essentially set up because of a good idea from a man called D.Y. Phadke, whom he had taken on the faculty of TIFR.
Towards the end of the 50s, they started building a fairly large computer. This was called the TIFR automatic calculator, And that computer ranks among the first 100 or so computers built around in the world, and it was quite state of the art at the time it was built. And it was just a sequence of instructions Narasimhan had written with Mr. Kane, perhaps India's first programmer. The two of them had designed and created this piece of code which would make the machine behave in a very complex way. And it was possible to do much bigger things. Gobind Swarup was building India's first radio telescope, one of the biggest. He could dream about having a computer process the data that comes out of the telescope.
Your Excellency, Mr. Prime Minister, Mr. Chief Minister, ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege to add my own welcome to that extended to you a moment ago by the Governor. Many of those present here today were probably here on this very site exactly 8 years and 14 days ago today, when you, Mr. Prime Minister, were good enough to lay the foundation stone, which can be seen at the corner of the building. We were grateful for your presence then, sir, but we are even more grateful and happy for it today, for in the intervening years you have given us constantly renewed proof of your sustained interest in the work that is being done here. An interest without which this institute could never have grown to its present stature of one of the leading centers of fundamental research in the world. This institute was founded in 1945. It is only today, some 16 and a half years later, that you, sir, are going to inaugurate this building. Now, by fundamental research, I mean basic investigations into the behavior and structure of the physical world without any consideration regarding their utility or whether the knowledge so acquired would ever have a practical value. The support of such research and of an institution where such research can be carried out effectively is of great importance to society. It has an immediate use in that it helps to train and develop in a manner which no other mental discipline can young men of the highest intellectual caliber in a society into people who can think about and analyze problems with a freshness of outlook and originality which is not generally found. Such men are of great value to society. So I'm happy to be here today to associate myself again in this function with this institute. We really have a very fine lot of younger scientists in India. It is meeting them and finding out what they have been doing that I have felt so hopeful about the future of science in India. I would like this example of Dr. Bhabha, that is to build up these groups of young scientists wherever there is the opportunity in India, to give them worthwhile work to do and opportunities to be followed all over this country. Now, if I am supposed to inaugurate this formally or to declare this open formally, I do so with great pleasure.
It is very clear that Homi Bhabha had a vision of what electronics developments will take place, particularly in the field of computers, and homegrown.
Whether it was reactor technology and computer technology, they were different. But he was excited about both of them.
Those were the days in the 50s when I wanted to come back to India, and molecular biology was growing. 1953 DNA was discovered, and those 10 years between 53 and 62 were the ones in which most of the ideas of molecular biology came into fruition. My first meeting with Dr. Bhabha was in his office in the old yacht club. He asked me whether I knew what my requirements were. And I said to him, if you tell me what are the sorts of limits within which I have to make my plans. And he laughed and he said, when you begin to cross the limits, then I will have to call you and tell you that. So that sort of put me at ease. Most of the institute building had been built by physicists, so there were no provisions for sinks and fume hoods, the kind of facilities that biologists need to work in the lab, what we call the wet lab facilities. When Dr. Bhabha saw that the only way we could have fume hoods in the main buildings of the institute would be if we cut the windows and had the ducts passing through the windows, and he didn't like that idea at all. So he said to me, well, we might better build a new laboratory for you. So he asked me to make plans for the lab and make drawings, which is what I did for the next 6 months. And he didn't like the drawings at all because he said that I had made them very crowded. And he took it home, and a couple of weeks later he called me and gave the drawing back to me and said to me, don't you think it looks much better now?
Sitting in TIFR building, I said, what's the advantage of being in India? I started thinking, apart from labor. So certainly in sitting in library at TIFR, I got an idea that we make parabolic cylinders, which I was well familiar, put in a hill slope, it's parallel to axis of Earth. It had to be 4 times larger area than anywhere in the world to be built cheaply. So mechanically point the beam towards the moon by phasing and then rotate the whole day. Bhabha grilled me for 1.5 hours. So he started realizing what will happen, will it go down, what will happen. Fortunately, I had thought about it. And then he said, it's a good idea. After 18 months' time, we couldn't import some couplings. And so one coupling came out, indigenous coupling, and 13 frames remained up, 11 came down. So like a chicken neck, a lot of trusses were damaged. It took us 2 years to repair it. In the process, we learned a lot more.
When he was there during that period, there was a call from Bombay, which had been received by his secretary in Kunur about the approval for one of the nuclear reactors. These are the very early stages, and many of these were still kept secret. So his secretary telephoned me and said, look, this project has been approved. So he gave me the details and he said, you please write down and then give it to Dr. Bhabha when he comes there, because Dr. Bhabha had left Kunur and he was on his way to Uti. So he came, and then as soon as he came, I got into his car and then gave him that slip of paper. He read it and said, this is still a secret, so destroy it. Don't keep it lying around. So what I did was I just tore it to pieces and then threw it out of the car window. You know, immediately he remarked that, what have you done, Srikantan? You did well in destroying that piece of paper, but you should not clutter the streets of Ooty. See, that is the kind of person he was.
If we make a mistake, tomorrow we can make better things. That was what Bhabha's guideline was also. Don't be afraid of making a mistake.
Even the space program is a derivative of Bhabha's thinking. Bhabha knew the importance of both big science and small science. He built accelerators and reactors one side, and then he built at TIFR and other places to do what he called small science. to really push the frontiers of physics, biology, astronomy. So this is the kind of man he was.
TIFR now tends to become a national distributed institute. Many groups that were born here went out. It's like the Homi Bhabha Center for Science Education. Then the National Center for Biological Sciences, which is now in Bangalore. The Center for Applicable Mathematics was grown in Bangalore. And even more recently, actually, all the new initiatives of the TIFR, like the International Center for Theoretical Sciences in Bangalore, the TIFR's new upcoming campus in Hyderabad.
Dr. Bhabha always had in mind a very close relationship between the institute and universities. Now, coming to Hyderabad, this is, of course, in the history of TIFR, a very large step that is now being taken, and we are trying to establish a new campus of TIFR in Hyderabad, just smack next to the Central University of Hyderabad, and the physical proximity of the university to our campus, I think, certainly allows for exciting possibilities.
As we all know, he was a very extraordinary man and really a Renaissance figure in the sense that he wasn't only a great scientist, but his interests extended to many other fields as well, and art was one of them. If he had not been a scientist and had diverted all his energies into painting and drawing and so on, we might have had a very great artist there.
Some of my paintings were shown in an exhibition organized by Tata. And there Mr. Bhabha acquired a painting. Now you see, when you start getting attention from all over, then it becomes less important where a painting is sold, acquired, exhibited. But when there are just a few handful of people in the whole country, it is very, very important.
He was fond of artists. He would be coming to the gallery. He would look at various pictures and then he would like to select the right frame. So he would hold the frame against the picture and then forget that that fellow would be holding the thing and he would get on with his work. You get it?
His visits to the frame shop would result in acquisitions, some of the earliest acquisitions for the collection. Keku Gandhi tells us that after a while, Bhabha would be offered first right of refusal on all the greatest paintings, simply because Gandhi was aware from a very early point in time that what Bhabha was doing at TIFR was basically building something of substance, probably for the first time in the Indian context. Really, the collection is a snapshot of the Indian scene generally, and more specifically the Mumbai art scene, during the first 25 years after Indian independence.
It seems to me that he was very favorably disposed towards all forms of fine art, not just paintings, but also music in general. And in occasions where he would have the ability to organize a musical event, he not only brought in musicians, he brought in musicians of the highest order.
This mural was Homi's idea, that he would have a mural at this particular location where we are standing today, at the place where the steps lead to the library. For this mural, he would invite the best artists in the country to come in a competition. There was a committee, and they finally selected M.F. Hussain. This particular painting which you have here on display, Bharata Bhagya Vidata.
See, in the Tata Institute, more than any other place, it's a synthesis of art and science also. So Dr. Bhabha as artist, architect, just admirer of fine things is something that's quite a unique characteristic.
The beautiful architecture in Trombay, the hexagonal pattern, the layout of various buildings, the roads, the garden, and even the reforesting of the hill is all essentially due to him. We used to say there is a Baba point on top of the hill in Trombay. He used to go and stand there and then take his architects and then say, I want this way, I want it to look this way. And he was successful.
If you go away from the very, very top, in very few countries, you quickly can't find a place as supportive to research as TIFR is. So I would say that's the main impact of Bhabha on me personally, that he built this fabulous institution, which has enabled me to, just give all my energy to doing research in India.
Once you're hired, you're given the creative freedom to truly ask the sort of questions that get you excited. And that sort of scientific freedom is unusual, especially in these sort of times, even internationally, where financial pressures often define what are the kinds of questions we ask.
The kind of liberty that TIFR gives to its research graduates, for example, I think that's what the legacy of Bhabha is about to me. That's what I see him through.
We are living out still much of his vision. I think he would have wanted for us to develop our own vision. When you raise a child, you don't want for that child to just live out your dreams. You want for that child to be able to dream by themselves.
His legacy basically was that, you need to be able to do these things on a large scale and appreciate that they have ramifications just beyond the basic research.
That is something I think you get here in TIFR, which you don't see so much elsewhere, even around the world, that there are people with so many different disciplines in close proximity.
He wanted to see a passion among the people out here, a commitment, a passion. And he said theoreticians would come back after dinner and work in their offices, and experimentalists would actually spend the night in offices doing their work. And he felt this is the mood, the passion, the commitment he wanted to capture and see in TIFR, which indeed he was able to see. So I think those qualities probably are still there in TIFR.
Truly carry his legacy forward, we have to couple research institutions to undergraduate teaching, and in an active way, such that you take people, scientists out of research institutions and let them see undergraduates, people who are in their bachelor's, people in their 11th and 12th. And the institution has been doing that to some extent through outreach, but needs to happen much more actively.
It seemed to me that he was always in a state of hurry. And I would like to call this a kind of creative or purposeful impatience. That was also singular in him. I would consider Bhabha's creative energies to be that of this active dreamer, that he dreamed big and he wanted to get there very quickly.
There was a phone call from the news desk of Times of India, and they told me that this particular plane on which Homi was traveling had disappeared over Geneva and probably had crashed on Mont Blanc.
Yatnemo Vahovadvimat Baishim Nere Hamarites Drujo Varetma Darestau Srausho Ashio Drigum Tratutimo Ho Varetrajo Drujan Jagnishno Naoshava Afrivachastemo Ho Varetravastemo Matros Mento Mediabim Drujem Nisbairisto Ho no Variovacham Varetrajastemo. He
had met Mrs. Indira Gandhi, who had taken over as Prime Minister, just before he had left for Bombay from Delhi. And she had given him clear indications that she wanted him to come to Delhi to take responsibility for the overall area of science and technology.
So
he played a very leading role in the development of science policy in India. So I would say certainly there has not been, after his death, absolutely clear there is no one of his ability around the scene.